I would like to introduce Scott to our podcast. It's nice to meet you, Scott. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning. So my name is Scott Tacchi. I'm Head of Modern Methods of Construction at Sir Robert McAlpine, and I've been at Sir Robert McAlpine for the last 18 months. Before that, I spent nearly 4 years at the Department for Education, again as Head of Modern Methods of Construction, setting up and running their off-site construction programme.
Fantastic. So let's start from the beginning then. Could you tell us a little bit about from the beginning of your journey until the present day?
Okay, certainly. So I have always been very interested in construction, the built environment. I had a father that was in that environment growing up. Following going to college, I went and worked in a civil engineering practice, technical draftsman, before doing my degree at Loughborough University. That was sponsored through what was initially Trafalgar House for some who are old enough to remember. Then it became Caverna and now Skanska. So my entire degree and education then, higher education, was through a built environment route. And really that carried on then working for Skanska after university and then moving on through the likes of Mott MacDonald and Mace in terms of project management and cost consultancy. Then ultimately into the DFE a few years ago as a client, which was a very different experience indeed, a very valuable learning experience for me. And now I've completed the circle again, now back into contracting.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the current state of the MMC market. How do you see the MMC playing out in its current state?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding from my perspective, and you might say, well, of course you're going to say that, Scott. But so much of what's in the press is negative press around MMC housing or volumetric and panelised housing systems. And certainly that is one very small, very niche part of the construction industry. But to compare or suggest that MMC housing is the industry, I think is very wrong. And I give the comparison. It's like comparing Ford making an F-150 truck to Apple making the iPhone. Both are consumer products.
Yep.
Both use many same parts, but they couldn't be further apart. And that's really where I see housing and the rest of the construction industry. And the industry that I work in has actually very little resemblance to housing. Housing, and certainly if we look at the parliamentary committee debate recently, it's very focused on volumetric panelised within the housing environment. If we look outside and look at sort of tier one contracting, then for me, I feel we need to move away from the 7 categories of volumetric and panelised and componentised or additive manufacturing. For me, that is just one very small element around all contemporary innovation that should be defined as modern methods of construction. We need to be looking and addressing platform. We need to be looking at DFMA. We need to be looking at the 7 categories under a heading of off-site. We need to be looking at digitalisation and industrialisation of our methods. That, for me, is what the discussion around modern methods of construction needs to be about. Not about, are we going to build it in a factory and put it on the back of a lorry? Is it going to be a house? It's misleading that conversation, and the trade press are misleading the industry at large, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Scott. There is that misconception within the MMC world. Everyone automatically thinks it's category 1, it's modular, and therefore, as we know of the current state of the market with category 1, it's not doing too well. No. And everyone, that perception is MMC is failing due to category 1. But I think there needs to be a reset and further education of what that is defined as, because there's many misconceptions within MMC.
And there are people, it's not just me, there are people out there doing that. If I look at the work that likes of WSP are doing in terms of their design, or Atkins Realis or Mott MacDonald in terms of their consultancy drive towards modern methods of construction, some fabulous work being undertaken around industrialisation of process, procedure and design, the digitisation, the DFMA approach, making huge strides forwards. And even as we start to go beyond new build into retrofit as well, and how componentization by the likes of Dalkia, NG Bailey, T Clark, I just don't think we're not shouting about it loud enough. It's almost like a good news story doesn't sell papers, only the bad news stories do. There are some fabulous examples out there of true innovation within the construction industry, within Tier 1 contracting.
It's funny you mentioned the retrofit market. I mean, that's the strongest market we've got to date. You know, we've got the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, Wave 2.1 at 800 million, and they just released the Decarbonisation Fund, Wave 2.2, so that's 880 million put into the market. And I think that market's, you know, got to be slick, it's got to be robust, it's got to be managed correctly. And it's also got to be shared, you know, lessons learned, and we sort of fail to do that within the construction side.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a spreadsheet on my laptop that looks at the centre of London, and EPC ratings in the centre of London. Okay, so there's targets, we've got to be category C by 2027, category B by 2030. Okay, this whole grey stock refurbishment piece is the new boom. It's certainly bigger than the new build market. So the spreadsheet that I've got, by 2030, within simply the centre of London, identifies 10 million square foot that needs refitting to bring up to EPC rating by 2030. 10 million square feet.
Crazy.
It is a huge market, and it is a market that certainly innovation around componentization and retrofit, it's really starting to grow.
Wow. I know certainly within the housing stock, it's 28 million they need to retrofit, which is incredible.
Indeed.
And certainly, you know, produces that volume of market. So how is Robert McAlpine like diversifying within the MMC sector? What do they define as MMC?
Okay, so we, the business, we define it as innovation or contemporary innovation within the construction market. So looking at all the things that I've spoken about around platform, DFMA, offsite, digital, and industrialization to drive productivity and performance improvements. That really where our focus is. So on many schemes, I get involved at tender stage for a project, looking at how we can improve the performance of that how we can improve the performance of that project through offsite, through standardization, through componentization, through digitization. You know, how can we drive performance improvements for our own benefit and for our clients' benefits also? That is what our goal is. It doesn't make it an easy goal.
No.
And I would suggest that the biggest challenge that I see on a daily basis is the industry is stuck in a mindset that you have to take a design to RIBA stage 3. Okay. And you do that with an architect and an engineering practice. Oh, and then we'll bring the person that's going to build the scheme on board to do the RIBA stage 4, the construction detailing. 70% of the opportunity has been lost by the time it gets to us as a contractor with a concluded RIBA stage 3. It leaves me and the teams that I'm working with really playing in the margins. What can we tweak here? What can we tweak there? Rather than early contractor involvement or early contractor engagement as per the construction playbook. Yeah. Bringing us in, let's say, even at a stage early at the end of RIBA stage 2 to really drive and enhance the design. It's not just a problem for Robert McAlpine, it is a problem for the industry. It's a problem that the construction playbook has tried to address in 2020, but only now do I feel and see the market starting to wake up to that. 4 years after that was published, but you could argue that it's taken us 30 years because Latham also spoke about it in 1994, 30 years ago. In fact, it's almost 30 years ago this week that Latham issued his initial report that in that spoke about early contractor engagement. And so that's the biggest challenge for us. Yes, we can make, and I don't just say Robert McAlpine, but contracting, tier 1 contractors in general, can bring huge opportunity and advantage to the design and delivery process, but you can't do that with a set design.
No.
And unfortunately, a lot of architects, a lot of engineering practices simply don't understand it.
Interesting. What sort of brings another barrier within the construction built environment is the golden thread and the Building Safety Act with the 3 stages, or the 3 gateways.
Yeah.
And I believe I think it was reported that 50% of the construction industry still don't understand what that means.
No. I mean, I'm very hopeful that the Building Safety Act, in terms of my reading of it at least, brings contractor engagement forward a step. I've debated that with many people, and there's lots of different opinions.
Yeah.
But my reading of it is that to get through, I think, Gateway 2, you have to have the contractor on board, which is pre-planning, which means it's pre-REBA Stage 3.
Yeah.
So I am very hopeful. I think it's a great piece of work that came out of a terrible tragedy that should never have happened. But if anything positive is to come out of that, it means that our buildings going forward will be much safer.
Absolutely, Scott. I completely agree. I think there's a lot of, a bigger education piece across the industry, and now we're going to implement that effectively so people fully understand what the Building Safety Act is, and how the golden thread is an important tool for the digital kit of parts can play in that. So
indeed. And throughout my company, we invest very heavily in our digitized approach. I've heard figures of something like 2 million a year in licenses alone for the construction. I'm not talking about the use of just Excel and Word, but in your Revit and your design and your field view and packages. It's we invest very heavily and take that very seriously, because we recognise that digitization and our approach to that can really assist in driving forward improvement in the business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I worked with the local authorities as a capital projects manager, and I certainly introduced some of the softwares which were, I think, important key to move them into the industry standards or moving into the future of MMC. And I certainly work with Procure, FieldView, PlanGrid. They're all good tools, in terms of that. So that's fantastic. So I know you mentioned procurement and what that looks like. And I repeat myself every time I say this, but I say modern methods of construction require modern methods of delivery. I think we've got modern methods with old delivery mentality. For example, using JCT contracts for a modular manufacturer, and this sort of don't work together.
No.
And we've not got that right yet, I believe.
So I touched on earlier that I've spent nearly 4 years in the civil service. So if I go back to when I was running consultancies, in the southwest, the default for me was an NEC, because I like the NEC. A lot of default for other people, an NEC D&B, default JCT D&B. I have certainly seen and am seeing a shift within public sector procurement away from JCT, D&B, all risk dump contracts. And some examples of that. So you've got the MOJ, Ministry of Justice, and therefore prisons, their alliancing programme. You've got FAC 1 contract that's now really prevalent within the industry, again, around alliancing. You've got what National Highways are trying to do with their future programmes as well, again, moving away to a much more collaborative approach to contracting, very enlightened approach. Yesterday you had the new hospitals programme launch their Hospital 2.0 design. There has been a significant, more than any other framework, I believe, really, around their future procurement and the conversations they've been having with the market to move away from risk dump, because nobody's going to take a 600, 700, maybe £1 billion hospital on board with a lump sum all-risk JCT contract. Is just not going to happen. So there is much more enlightened discussion around contracting models, but we still see contracts coming out, and even discussing last night with a colleague a potential £400 million scheme, and the The PQS practice is asking, will we go single stage lump sum on a £400 million scheme? No. It's pretty much, but no is coming back from the entire industry. And for me, I'm seeing a much more enlightened tier one contractor approach rather than continuing the race to the bottom and undervaluing what we do and losing tens, if not hundreds of millions in a year, as has been reported by a number of tier one contractors in the last 6 months. The contracting market is also changing, starting to value what it's doing and starting to say, no, we're not going to take on this unprecedented, undefinable level of risk. And clients are now having to listen, being forced to listen to us.
Very interesting. So within the MMC space then, what honest conversations do you think we should have in terms of synergy with the government, the client, the contractor? You know, what's missing? What do we really need to nail down for?
Yeah, a question I get asked many times. Okay, and so it's, you know, there are a number of different priorities for me. Let's start with cost.
Yeah.
Okay, because I am regularly asked, well, make it cheaper, Scott, make it cheaper, and I've got some colleagues who are that's their only interest. Make it cheaper. Okay. And I think we need to accept, what does cheap buy you? Does cheap ever buy you the best? Does cheap buy you innovation? Okay, so I would argue in some cases, although in the DFE it was different, we were buying cheaper than traditionally because of our pipeline. But if 20% of the cost of an asset is in the build and 80% is over the life, do you really want to focus on saving 1 or 2% from the 20, or do you want to focus on saving 1 or 2% from the 80? Okay, so if you were obsessed in buying cheaper in the 20%, you will invariably increase the cost over the 80%. I want to move the conversation from cost to value, and how in actual fact, I feel that very few people actually understand the value of something, they only understand the cost. Yet, you can ask a monkey to give you the cost. Literally, if you can program a monkey to press enter on a computer and spit out the bills, okay, you can know the cost of something, but it takes skill and intellect to understand the value of something. And adding cost can exponentially increase the value of an asset. So I will say, if people say, is it cheaper? Then sometimes no. Buying a package for package may be slightly more expensive if you are buying an off-site, but you are buying better quality most of the time. Okay, you're buying better defects, you're buying better health and safety, you're buying better social value. There are a dozen reasons to look at off-site, and let's call it an MMC or industrialized approach to the traditional. And there's only one reason for me now to look at the traditional, and that is, how cheap can I buy that initial 20% investment? I am concerned. I've heard rumours that the value toolkit is being dropped, will no longer be supported, no longer be pushed by the likes of CLC and Infrastructure Projects Authority, and that in itself is moving us backwards towards a most economically advantageous tender or cheapest price tendering position within the public sector. If the points I've just previously made are true around the 20% and 80%, I think that is a desperately sad and backward step. A backward step going back 30, 40, maybe even 50 years for the construction industry, if value is not going to be valued.
Wow. The government really needs to listen in to that statement, you know.
And I think the CLC need to push it. You know, we shouldn't give the CLC a pass on pushing for value and allow for that great piece of work to be dropped. We shouldn't allow for the likes of the construction playbook, where many of the 14 principles that talk about early contractor engagement actually really drive a performance and value position underlying through all of those principles to be left floundering and not adopted, and I don't believe the construction playbook has been properly adopted since its launch in 2020.
Interesting, very interesting, Scott. So what would your advice be to subcontractors working with tier one contractors within the MMC space? You know, what are the snag points, touch points where you feel like it make it a lot more slick and robust?
So I very recently wrote to 40, maybe 50 of McAlpine's top suppliers, okay, asking them to define their USP, okay, asking them to define what innovation they have, asking to define where they are pushing the industry. And I got quite a mixed bag of response, if I'm honest. I got some fabulous responses, stuff that I simply didn't know about some of our suppliers. And I got some very lackluster responses as well. For me, with SMEs, okay, have a clear definition. Be able to define, not wait for a head of MMC to write to you going, can you give us some bullet points? Be very upfront with what innovation, where your R&D, what separates you from the rest of the field. It would certainly make my life a lot easier, and I'm sure it would make my counterparts' lives a lot easier if we can clearly define what our offer is, rather than, and invariably historically we've historically tendered just on price. Okay, here's a spec, give us exactly what we're asking for. Well, we now ask for what innovation across material, across methodology, across plan and equipment, across digitization. It is now an active part of our tendering process. But SMEs find that difficult to respond to because they've not defined that for themselves.
Really good feedback, that, Scott, especially for our listeners. Fantastic, really. And I suppose, again, it all goes back to the golden thread and Building Safety Act, and the competency frameworks now is a big one. You know, you've got to prove that everyone is qualified, and the due diligence checks are done and completed and recorded, and it all falls back down to the client function. So absolutely.
But why shouldn't people and business competency be asked and proven?
Absolutely. For me, especially in my previous roles, you know, the due diligence, you know, it's just a basic standard, right? But now I think, again, the government is driving that, where there is accountability, more onus on the client to do their role, and ensure that the competency framework is in place, and there is traceability, accountability. So very interesting. And I know low carbon supply chain seems to be a big one at the minute within the construction space. EPDs seem to be mentioned by architects a lot. You know, if you're going to provide a product, then they need an EPD. That seems to be the standard route.
Yes. Yeah, and there's lots of challenge around actually proving those EPDs as well, and the competency of those documents, but it's a start, and it's a good start. Yeah,
absolutely, Scott, I completely agree. So where do you see Sir Robert McAlpine in the next 3 years?
God, wow. I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that, if I'm honest. Anybody reading the trade press, it's been we've had a change in management. In the last 12 months, we had a change in structure from regions to national workstream businesses. We've had a change in chief exec. Paul has gone, Neil has come in. We are still focused on those key areas that were defined 12 months ago within the business. And I support that change. I think the way that the business is aiming towards a national work streams, like some major infrastructure and hospitals programs, is absolutely key for the type of organisation, an innovative organisation that Sir Robert McAlpine are. You know, if we look at their joint venture on HS2, you know, incredible innovation, and I think we've just bored out the second Chiltern Tunnel.
Wow.
I think that was yesterday. Some more pictures were online about that.
Fantastic.
you know, where do I see Struttmark Alpine? I see it as a leader of innovation. That's where I see the business in whatever area, be it in nuclear or national highways or say, hospitals or commercial or industrial. I think that's where the differentiator is it's not a race to the, we're not a race to the bottom contractor. We are an innovative and doing it better contractor, and that hopefully I can play a small part in that. Or after this podcast, I'll be out.
No, it's really informative, Scott. If you could change one thing within the MMC space, what would you change?
So if I could change one thing, so I'm going to do.
You can do as many.
I'll do two.
Okay.
I'll do two. Okay. So in the industry at large, it's culture and mindset. Okay. We have a culture of well, I've done it like this for 30 years, so I'm going to do it like this for 30 years. And changing that culture and mindset that there simply isn't any other way we can do this to improve is incredibly blinkered. You know, I see the innovation that's out there. I see better ways of doing things. Getting that message out to architects and engineering practices, getting us involved early enough to be able to bring that innovation is battling that culture and mindset. And the second point is going back 5 or 6 years maybe to when Mark Farmer and the great report he did, which has really led into where we are today in 2017. I think it's Innovate or Die, or Modernise or Die, sorry. Yeah. And the categorization. Okay, I would love to see us drop the 7 categories of MMC and move into, for me that is a 2015 response. For me, a 2025 response is about industrialized construction. It is about, as I've repeated before, I'll repeat myself, platform, DFMA, offsite, digitization, and industrialization of process and procedures. Those are the 2 things I would change about the industry and about the discussion that everybody is having. But there are people that, as I've said earlier, that are having that discussion and who are moving in that direction, including, thankfully, the Infrastructure Projects Authority, who I believe, and the lead, Jennifer there, who is enlightened in relation to this.
Very interesting, yeah, very interesting statements. And the, like you say, the 7 categories, and I know what's in the midst of the MMC world and the uncertainty and the interpretation or misinterpretation, I think one positive, well, the major driver is everyone's starting to really sit up and think within the business or their business model. For example, Ibstock Futures have had a fantastic 200-year history within the clay brick industry. Indeed. And now we've diversified into Ibstock Futures, which is to support that MMC space. So I think it certainly drives that, like you say, innovation, and I think it's key. Yeah, I
mean, just yesterday I spent an hour on a conference call with a company from Ireland looking at their SFS panel system that's got a brick slip on the outside, where we will be installing the brick in a factory, bringing it to site, and when the facades go up, they are 99% complete. In fact, you don't even need scaffolding up the outside of some of their design solutions. We remove scaffolding and all the health and safety issues that come with scaffolding from the installation. If we can make innovative steps like that's huge. That's game changing. That it truly is innovation within the construction industry. Is an SFS slip system new? Is it cutting edge? Or they've been around for a while. But the application and more people like yourselves, Ibstock, getting into this market and pushing it, and opening up opportunities and design opportunities is key. And then what it does, it takes months off of site.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the important, like you say, of the collaboration, communication, and the competence within that to really drive that innovation and build that MMC space, what's going to drive the future of construction and addresses the issues with the skills gap. Obviously the programme and the tier one contractor who has to manage that at the business end. So yeah, very interesting.
I mean, we've Sir McAlpine have got a scheme in Bristol, so it is a landmark scheme in Bristol, 250-ish million. The MEP contractor has been on board with us for 3 years. And we went to site 6-7 months ago, but they were on board 2 years in the pre-construction.
Wow.
Through that, we've enabled 36,000 man-hours to be removed from site and undertaken in the factory.
Wow.
Okay. The increase in quality and defect reduction will be exponential, as well as then people are able to live at home, work in a factory. The social value gain in that is phenomenal. There's lots of people now really starting to push at the envelope at what can be done and do we really need a van full of guys invariably going from Manchester to London and a van full of guys going from London to Manchester and crossing on the motorway every Monday and Friday to live in pretty squalid conditions and deliver dubious quality. I see that as a great future, as well as the carbon reduction and all that travelling, a great future for the industry.
So Scott, I understand that you're passionate about the housing market and you've got that drive to innovate and change. What are your thoughts on the current market within the housing market, both social housing and private?
Okay, thank you. I think it's a really good question. And yes, I am passionate about housing. I'm passionate about housing because if you look at the recent statistics, 1.2 million people, families living in rented, often very poor accommodation, 130,000 children without adequate housing or housing provision. So yes, I am passionate because I think it's actually a national outcry that we're in this position. If we look at the housing starts over the last 12 months, we have reached a new record low, only beaten by the global recession in 2008. And then you've got to go back to the Second World War to see this lowest level of housing starts again. So yes, we are in a national housing crisis. And I think many people don't understand what's going on. And I don't fully blame the government for this, okay, although I do believe they have a significant part to play. Certainly we have issues with planning. We have had the knock-on of inflation through self-inflicted wounds of Brexit, through the horrific time of COVID, through supply chain issues that have all driven pricing significantly higher, 30-40% higher than where we were in 2019. We have affordability issues that come with all of that, and inflation rates reaching a 15 or is it 20-year high when we've been used to very low inflation rates. And we have the reporting around all the insolvencies around MMC, factories going under. Well, is it any wonder? If we look at the housing model of the 10 big housing contractors, and we'll understand what a house costs. So if an average, I'll use an example, if an average 3-bed social house, semi-detached costs 280,000, the actual cost of that house in bricks and mortar and materials is around about 85,000. Okay, you then add on profit and other bits and pieces. You're getting to maybe half of the value of the cost of that house because of land and legal and Section 106s. But if it looks like there is a risk that because of a slowdown or recession that a developer, any one of the top 10 developers, isn't going to be able to build that or able to sell that house, under the traditional model they can just turn that off almost within 7 days and stop work, stop their outlay of expenditure. Whereas if we're buying from a factory, you are tied in potentially 9 months, 6 to 9 months in advance, and you simply cannot stop the supply. So although what I believe in terms of the likes of social housing and many social housing, that you can actually get a better quality product out of the factory, we can certainly get a better sustainable carbon zero product out of a factory. it comes to simple economics of the major house building contractors and supply and demand. If there isn't a demand, you can cut the supply off in the next 7 days rather than having a 9-month lag and actually having a significant churn of your investment locked up in a factory style environment. Do I think off-site MMC housing will come back, or when the housing market recovers? I'm absolutely sure it will, if there's anybody left in the market. And for me, that is a very real concern, that there simply may be nobody left in the market. But if we are talking about insolvencies and quality concerns, you know, we need to not be looking through rose-tinted spectacles. There are a lot of issues with traditional contracting as well. In the last 6 months, you've had Crest Nicholson put aside 15 million for defects. We've had Bellway put 30 million aside for defects. We've had Barrett and David Wilson put 40 million aside for defects and demolition of traditionally built houses. You know, there is, what, 100 million in the last 6 months nearly being put aside against traditional homes being demolished because of defects. We need to acknowledge this as an industry. We need to get better across the board.
Yeah.
This is not an MMC housing focused issue. I would say I don't think it's been helped by having 16 housing ministers in 14 years, and what will be invariably come October or September, 17 housing ministers in 14 years. For me, that just really shows what priority the government has put on housing and construction, which is almost zero importance.
So could you expand more on the retrofit market?
Certainly, I mean, I'll put housing to one side for the moment and look at maybe sort of major grey stock refurbishment. So likes of city centre refurbishment. I touched on it in my previous comments that I've got a spreadsheet that's got 10 million square feet of opportunity that has to be addressed if we're going to come in line with the EPC ratings and legislation. I mean, let's just make that clear. If we're going to be in line with legislation by 2030, there's 10 million square foot in central London. So I think it is a huge growth opportunity. A huge growth opportunity not only for the industry and society at large to improve our energy performance and reduce our carbon footprint, but a huge opportunity for contractors and dare I say, I'll call it modern methods of construction, and the componentization and standardization of design and methodology. You know, there is a lot of buildings that are going to need to be retrofitted with improved lighting systems, improved energy systems, enhanced facading, and you know, to remove energy and heat leakage from buildings. You know, if you spend time in London at night, you know, you've just got to go around the city and see how many lights are on in office blocks. I mean, the city is lit up.
Absolutely.
You've got to question, why is the city lit up at night? Yeah. How much energy are we burning? And if we simply put the economics of that to one side for a moment, and just think that, you know, every watt used is a power station, you know, and burning or wind turbines running or whatever that could be better used somewhere else. Even the most efficient methods of energy production still have a carbon footprint. Wind farms, solar panels still needed to be made in the first place. So it's not carbon free. There is still a carbon cost to us and a societal cost and a global cost. So we need to get much more efficient and come in line with legislation by 2030. The opportunity, I don't have a pounds figure, but it's in the many billions of work that needs to be done. I think it's a huge growth opportunity for Sir McAlpine and everybody.
Yeah, certainly Ibstock Futures clearly sees that market space and the collaboration required, especially in the facade sector. You know, we have many offerings within that space, and we understand that the retrofit is key, and having the robust expertise, competencies and a system that can provide that reduced energy or low carbon footprint within the supply chain.
I think collaboration is a really interesting phrase you've used there. For me, whilst I was in the Department for Education, everything that we did was around collaboration. It was a collaborative approach with contractors. It was a collaborative approach with contractors through their supply chain. It was a collaborative approach from contractor to contractor. Now, at one point, I got accused of collusion. Okay, because people didn't understand the difference between collaboration and collusion. I would hasten to add there, in terms of having open discussions around how can we do this better to benefit everybody. And certainly the way that technology is advancing, innovation that is coming through from the likes of yourselves, Ibstock and others, architects, engineers, contractors, we can't do this on our own. There needs to be a collaborative approach to design and detailing and material use to optimize that and drive the very best and productive way forward, reducing waste in redesign. So it has to be all done collaboratively, rather than what I would say is the traditional contracting method, which is anti-collaborative. It's holding everybody at arm's length. It's very singularly defined roles with a scope of service.
Yeah.
Where there invariably is always gaps. The best projects I've seen are where there has been a collaborative approach. And for those that might be listening to this, if you've not looked up the ICE's Project 13 book that was written about 10 years ago, for me that is the starting point around collaboration and future contracting models. Certainly a model that the National Highways Agency are very keen to now look at mimicking.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, I think that'll be the end of this podcast. And thank you for attending. Much appreciated. Is there anything else you would like to add before we end the second episode?
No, I'm pretty good. Thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic.